Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the ARORA's 2021 Funeral Home Symposium. I want to give you just a little information and housekeeping before we get started. First, make sure you have registered for each day you wish to attend the symposium. In order to receive your CEUs, you must be registered for this symposium. You must fill out a survey for each day to receive your CEUs. Your microphones have been muted, but if at any point in time you have any questions, you may submit them in the questions area. Please welcome Funeral Home Service Liaison, Gerald Curtis.
We want to once again thank you, each and every one of you, for the work that you have done in caring for families in some of the hardest times that we have known. We know that the pandemic has made the work that you do even more difficult. Yet you continued to do it so that families felt supported and could plan their funerals and memorials needed to say goodbye to their loved ones. We are grateful for all that you do and your continued partnership with ARORA to ensure that families have continued to have opportunity to donate. Good morning to you all. I am Gerald Curtis, the Funeral Services Liaison with ARORA. We have a very exciting conference planned for you today. It's a very excellent learning opportunity, and it is ARORA's pleasure to sponsor this event as a thank you for your continued cooperation and support of restoring and saving lives. ARORA pledges our commitment to the funeral directors of Arkansas to provide education relating to the standards of the funeral home industry. Our goal is to enhance communication with funeral directors across the state, building relationships and working together for the good of the families we both serve. Mike Nicodemus currently conducts the National Funeral Directors Association Crematory Operators Program. Mike also serves as a member of the board of directors of the Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science, where he is an alumnus. He is licensed to practice in 3 states, which includes Virginia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Mike is a highly sought after speaker on the national and state levels and has been retained in numerous lawsuits as an expert witness in various cremation cases for funeral homes and crematories. I feel we are honored to have someone of Mike Nicodemus's caliber to speak with us today. Mike, please take it away. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Gerald, and welcome back to those that were here yesterday. And for those that weren't here yesterday, welcome. And I want to thank you all, and I want to thank ARORA for sponsoring this. This is a tremendous opportunity that they provide you. So thanks for being here today. Going to share a little bit of information for those that weren't on the program yesterday. I think you're going to learn quite a bit. For those of you that were here yesterday, you're going to see some duplication of slides. I like to put them in case someone didn't see some things yesterday that I can explain today. So I just want to throw this out here on why we picked this program. This program 2 years ago at the NFDA convention in Chicago was attended by 135 people, and it was the highest rated program of the convention, if you can believe that, a program on paperwork. But I have been involved in enough lawsuits as an expert witness, and I'm going to explain the importance of proper paperwork, because the attorneys will say, and the judge will look at it also, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So the importance of having proper paperwork to avoid being sued is critical for for you to stay out of a court of law. Sloppy, incomplete, or inaccurate paperwork will lead, trust me, it will lead to litigation and possibly unemployment for those that do not turn in the paperwork on time, that it's not filled in properly, it's sloppy. I'm going to go over all of that today. So something is what some people just kind of kick to the side, paperwork, big deal. Well, I'm going to explain why it's a big deal today. And as I said yesterday, this PowerPoint is for informational purposes only and not for the purpose of providing legal advice. I said this yesterday and I'll say it again today. What exactly does this mean? I have received 38 phone calls from 38 different attorneys since October of 2017, 4 years, asking if I would serve as their expert witness in cremation gone wrong lawsuits, either against the funeral home or the crematory. So I have been involved in a number of lawsuits that I think to myself, after the attorney, it goes something like this. I answer the phone and I say, "This is Mike Nicodemus." "Hey, Mike, this is Greg Smith. I'm an attorney here in Little Rock, Arkansas." And I'm thinking, oh, here we go. "And you were given, I was given your name," and so on. And then he explains to me about the case a little bit. And I just sit there and shake my head. And I'm like, what are they thinking? What are these people thinking that did this? It's hard to imagine that in the year 2021, I get phone calls. One of the duties of my job is to answer phone calls from NFDA members that might have some type of a question, or what should I do, or what about this policy or procedure, or do you have this, do you have that kind of a form? And so I field phone calls all the time. One of the phone calls I fielded not too awfully long ago was from a funeral director saying, "Mike, can I hold the urn of the cremated remains here at the funeral home until the family pays me?" And I said, "You have the urn, you haven't released them because they haven't paid you." "Yeah, can I do that?" And so I just kind of like said, "Sure. Yeah, you can do that if you want to be on the 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news, on CNN and everything else." I said, "No, you don't do that. You give them the urn, and if they don't pay you, sue them." I said, "It's as simple as that." I said, "The news media is not even going to mention that the family hasn't paid you. They're just going to say, Smith Funeral Home has not released the cremated remains, won't give them to the family." And they're going to coach that family to make you look like, oh, you're the worst person in the world. "You won't give me my mother's cremated remains. I can't imagine." You're not going to say anything about non-payment, and it really doesn't matter, okay? Because like I said, if they don't pay you in a reasonable amount of time, take them to small claims court. But in 2021, I'm still getting calls like that. I'm getting calls that said, "Mike, I cremated." They called after the fact. "I cremated a woman. Her son did not want her cremated, but the power of attorney who was controlling the estate did want her cremated. So I went ahead and had her cremated." I'm like, power of attorney, as you know, means nothing once that last breath is taken. It now falls back on to the next of kin. In most states, or a order of a designee or whatever state, that you're working in. But he calls after the fact. So anyway, litigation is at an all-time high. Believe me, like I said, there's thousands of attorneys out there that are looking to get their hands on some of your insurance money. Here's a quote from Kevin Foley, an attorney, who said, failure to have proper documentation regarding your interactions with clients damages your credibility if you are called to testify in a lawsuit. Lack of proper documentation makes the company look sloppy, unorganized, and lends to the plaintiff's allegation of negligence and/or breach of contract. If an individual or a company is sloppy with their documents, it's much easier for a jury to believe that you are sloppy with the way you do business. You're just sloppy. It's not that you don't care. You're sloppy. And sloppy paperwork leads to sloppy work, period. What exactly is sloppy paperwork? Incomplete work, not filled in properly, mistakes on the paperwork, poor quality, late delivery. They were supposed to have it in yesterday, and here it is today. Late, ineffective, or unsafe shortcuts. They're filling things in on behalf of the family. Not a good thing to do. That's examples of sloppy paperwork. Diagnosing sloppy paperwork. How do you know? The employee may feel rushed due to their own procrastination or poor time management. Okay, they've got to see a family at 10 o'clock and they come walking in the door at 2 minutes after 10. Family's already sitting there waiting, so hurry up, grab the papers, get up into the arrangement conference, let's get this thing going. They don't feel the importance of double checking their work. They may feel rushed to finish, or they have a low ambition. They're a disengaged employee. They don't care about the quality. It's paperwork. That's what it is. And it may indicate the employee is disengaged. You have engaged employees and you have disengaged employees. Folks, let me tell you, if you have a disengaged, this is your business. This is what you've worked hard for. This is what you, blood, sweat, and tears. You borrowed and you built on and you did and you got successful. And now you've made it with a lot of hard work and dedication. And now you have an employee that comes in that's disengaged, that's going to tear all that down for you. If you have a disengaged employee, ladies and gentlemen, fire them, okay? They're like a cancer. It's going to spread to the rest of the employees. If someone is disengaged, okay, get rid of them. Just tell them this is not working. Most Americans are at-will employees, meaning your employee can fire you at any time for any reason without any warning at all. Unless, as you can see, that it's due to race or religion or sex, ethnicity, handicapped, or age. Okay? You just can't, I mean, you can fire someone if it's not one of those reasons. If they're just not doing the job, you don't like the job they're doing, they're late to work, they're on their cell phone all the time, the paperwork is just horrid, be sure to document why they were fired, okay? Most attorneys want to get your case, like I said yesterday, in front of a sympathetic jury, where the settlement may be much higher than that of a judge. You're going to have 9 people, 11 people sitting there, especially if someone has lost a loved one in their family recently, and they present a case, they're going to say, oh my, that's terrible. That's awful. And then they go deliberate, and that person just says, oh, I can't believe they did this or whatever. And so, oh, that's just terrible. Where a judge, okay, they're going strictly on the law. A judge has to keep their feelings separate from any type of settlement. They're going strictly by who was right, who was wrong, and how did you prove it? My job as an expert witness is to take a case. They send me interrogatories, depositions, exhibits, all that. I have to look over all of that, okay? And then I have to write my affidavit saying that ABC Funeral Home did not do this, they did not do that, they did not do this. I want to see if I can find something here. I just saw it. And I want to read to you just on a lawsuit I am involved in. I don't know where some of them, I was involved in 2 or 3. I don't know where they stand right now because of the COVID. The courts are so backlogged and so on. But this is what I ended up with on my initial thoughts in this case. I said, oh, well, let me go one here. So-and-so funeral home breached their contract and acted recklessly by failing, reckless, okay? Negligence and reckless, I explained that and I'll explain it again, and acted recklessly by failing to properly remove the remains from so-and-so of Miss So-and-so and representing, they performed her cremation. And then I said, all defendants acted with negligence, recklessness, and in an utterly unethical and unprofessional manner. Now, if you get that from an expert witness that has any type of credibility, that has any type of experience, okay, say like me, I've been doing this for 40 some years, so I do have some credibility and I do have the experience. If you get an affidavit written like that, you pretty much want to start talking figures as far as a settlement, because you know it's gonna be terrible if you go into court. Okay, now sometimes you can't help it to go into a court of law and have the judge explain what's going on. Sometimes goes before a jury. You can't help it, but I'm going to show you 2 settlements that went to a jury trial. This one here, $8 million. The jury awarded a Texas family over a missing body. She was stolen from the funeral home. Stolen in October of 2015, and to the best of my knowledge, she is still missing. They said give 4 to the father, give 4 million to the mother. And this one here, this really got me. A jury awarded an Alabama woman $12 million. Now, of course, both of these, they're going to appeal, but they awarded her $12 million when the funeral home could not locate her mother's cremated remains. Now, don't you think someone on the jury might think, this is 4 years after her death. Where you been? Why haven't you come to look for him beforehand? Why now? So regardless of why she didn't show up 4 years ago, is immaterial. They couldn't find anything, couldn't document nothing. And the jury awarded her $12 million. Anybody here on this program, can you take a $12 million hit? I don't think so. And like I said yesterday, will your general liability policy cover these type of awards? Quite possibly, no. You need to have a professional liability policy, okay, with an umbrella to be able to cover these type of catastrophic events. So my suggestion, as I said yesterday, and I'll say it again today, sit down with your insurance agent. Find out exactly what coverage you have and just run it by, say, what happens if? I tried, mistakes can happen. To say I go over with all my employees not to release the earn unless their name is on the authorization. Here's the form we use and say, this earn is not to be released except to the following people. But they released it anyhow to someone that shouldn't have had it. Would I be covered if the family sues me and the jury awards them $3 million? Have the insurance agent take a look. Opposing counsel, here's what they're going to do. They're going to try to illustrate how sloppy documentation and messy handwriting is indicative of a messy and careless funeral director. And they're going to look for anything that cannot be read and will use technology to blow it up and ask jurors if they can read it. When they can't, they will ask, well, how can anyone be expected to read what's on this form? They're not just going to pass the form around and have each individual look at it or whatever. They're going to blow it up on the big screen in the courtroom. Say, here you go. Everybody can see, and they're going to point. They're going to use that little laser pointer and highlight. Say, look at this. This one wasn't filled in. Can anybody read this? Can anybody? And people are sitting there looking at that saying, oh, Lord have mercy. That's terrible. And that's the cremation authorization you're going to go on. Like I said yesterday, the attorneys will chew you up and spit you out. They will. I mean, their sole purpose is to win this case for their client, for the plaintiff. And the defense attorney is going to say, not a whole lot I can do. Look how sloppy this is. Can't even read it. I'll get into the discovery phase of the lawsuit here in just a minute. But this is how they work today. Okay, they're very meticulous if the attorney is any good. Okay. Now, like I said yesterday, according to the FTC, cremation procedures, not embalming, not restorative art, not funeral processions, cremation procedures are the largest source of risk exposure and liability in the funeral industry. Funeral homes have a binding responsibility to ensure that the cremation be carried out in a legal, professional, and ethical manner. That's what we spoke about yesterday. Evaluating your third-party crematory, you better make 2 unannounced visits a year. Get down and see what they're doing. If you go into a court of law and they say, when was the last time you even went down to your third-party crematory? Oh, I don't know. Why haven't you? Well, we've been using them for 15 years, haven't had any problems. I don't see why, we need to start doing that stuff now. Really? They're going to show you don't care and that you have nothing in writing. So therefore, doesn't matter. Didn't happen. And FDA has these forms on our website under legal forms as to what you do when you go and make an inspection or you go and speak to the owner. Funeral homes, there's a lot of funeral homes, like I said yesterday, that when they take a body to the crematory, they think their job's done. No way. Absolutely not. Your third-party crematory is an extension of you. And families do not care about your third-party crematory. They called you. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear. I had a guy just because it popped into my mind. I had a guy in Baltimore tell me one time during the certification class that when we were talking about shipping, mailing cremated remains, he said, I don't mail cremated remains anymore. And I said, okay, fair enough. Why not? And he said, why should I assume the responsibility and liability over something I have no control over? I take them to the post office, give it to one of their employees. How do I know what's happened to them? Is the family calling the post office? No, they're calling me, the funeral home. And he said, I'll take the brown wrapping paper. This was several years ago. I'll take before they had the box now. I'll take the brown wrapping paper. I'll take the labels. He said, I'll give them a ride to the post office, but I'm not going in and mailing them no more. So, that's what's going to happen. They don't want to hear about the post office. They don't want to hear about your third party crematory. They don't want to hear about your livery company, that the guy showed up driving the limousine and he was half drunk, whatever. No, they called you. Now, here's 4 reasons that will get you into a court of law. Wrongful authorization. Make sure you know who's signing your cremation authorization and know your state statutes as to who can sign. No identification. 38 states require identification, 12 of them do not. I couldn't believe it. NFDA sent out a survey one time saying, the question was, if you live in a state that does not require identification, do you do it anyway? And I about fell off my chair when the results came back. 38.3% said, we live in a state where identification is not required, therefore we don't do it. Almost 40% of those surveyed said, nah, we don't do it. It's not required, so therefore I'm not going to do it. Why should we set the features and put some clothing on them or do whatever, put them on here and have the family? If we're not required to do it, I'm not doing it. How can you bury a body without identification, let alone cremate one? Lost or misdelivered cremated remains, give them to someone that's not supposed to have them, good luck getting them back. And family disputes, stay out of them. Don't take sides. I kind of agree with your sister here, Mr. Tom. Well, who asked you? I didn't ask you for your opinion, Mr. Nicodemus. Stay out of them, folks. When you all, come to an agreement, let me know. Here's your 3 options. When you come to an agreement, let me know. Let's go to probate court, or tell me what funeral home you'd like me to call to come get your mother, because I don't think I'm going to be able to help you. And then there's one more: paperwork. Sloppy paperwork will make you look like you run a sloppy funeral home, crematory. Here on being a funeral director, the people say, what's the hardest part about being a funeral director? Me? The paperwork. The people say, no, like, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? Me? The paperwork. Our authorization at the funeral home where I was at and ran our cremation operations for 35 years, where we were never litigated with 2,000 calls a year, our authorization was 6 pages long. A guy said to me one time, he said, my God, he said, this is awful. He said, I didn't have to sign this much when I bought a house. And I said, well, sir, you're not buying a house. You're signing paperwork to cremate your wife. And that's the way we do things here. You don't like your house, move. But once we start that cremation process, there's no going back. That's why we do what we do and have you sign an initial as many times as we do, so that you understand what our policies and procedures are when it comes to cremation. Be familiar with your own policies and procedures. Policies and procedures are mandatory for a reason. Okay, we don't require identification. Yeah, but we do here at ABC Funeral Home. Even though the state doesn't require it, whatever needs to be filled in, fill it in. If an owner or manager have to admit ignorance, they'll say, well, I didn't really, aren't you the manager of that facility? Yeah. And you didn't realize that you required identification, or whatever the case might be. Say, well, no. A jury is going to view that as uncaring and purposeful, not forgetfulness. You didn't forget it. You don't even know. How can you enforce policies that you don't even know what they are? Protect your credibility of the funeral home and yourself. Take time to document what's required. If you ever go into a court of law, you're going to be glad you did. As the lead attorney in the Tri-State Crematory in Noble, Georgia said, the more documentation you have, the less attractive of a defendant you'll make. So document, document, document. I don't care how big, how small it is, whatever it might be, document it. Remember, if a family's not willing to provide the information you require to complete your forms, contact your supervisor or owner immediately. Never make exceptions, ever. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and do it this time, but I just can't. I'm really stretching it here, but no, don't ever make exceptions. If they're not giving it to you, they come in and they say, a young lady comes in who has lost a one-day-old child, and say, I need the husband's signature on the authorization. I don't want him to have anything to do with this. Well, see, by law, he has as much right to the disposition of the baby as you do. Well, I'm not signing it. I'm not giving you his name. In fact, I don't even know who it might be. Are you going to go ahead with, okay, well, all right, well then, since you don't know or whatever, we'll go ahead and do it. The husband finds out, or the boyfriend finds out, doesn't have to be married, okay? He's the father of that child. He comes in and says, hey, I understand my infant son died a day ago. I'd like to do something. I'd like to make some arrangements or something or whatever. Oh, well, we already went ahead and cremated, him based on the mother's signature. Well, what about my signature? I'm the father of the child. Never make exceptions. If they don't want to do, I had a family come in to me one time, true story, on a Friday and say, we'd like you to put this obit in the paper tomorrow because we want a memorial service on Sunday. So this was a Friday. And I looked at the obit and read the obit. I made the comment, I said, boy, whoever wrote this obit, I said, did a tremendous job. And I said, there's only one thing though. I said, you didn't put in the date of death. And they said, well, that's because he's not dead yet. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. But he's not dead yet, but he will be this afternoon. What's he gonna do? Go home, shoot him, or run over with the car or something? Push him down the steps? I said, he's not dead yet. And you want me to put an obit in? They said he is on life support and they're disconnecting it this afternoon. Okay, wonderful. I said, folks, I cannot put an obit in on someone who's not dead. They said, if you don't, we'll go to someone who will. And I said, well, I guess you'll just have to go to someone who will, because I won't. They went somewhere else put the obit in. And I went by the church where they were having a memorial service on Sunday, and they still had it. Anybody want to take a wild guess as to what didn't happen? For those of you that are shaking your head saying he didn't die, you're exactly right. He died several days later, but he was still alive when they had his memorial service. Never make exceptions. Family disputes, don't offer your opinions. Don't take sides. Don't analyze the situation. Don't side with the person who has the checkbook. Well, they're going to pay for it, so I'm going to go. No, no, no. You're not going to win. So when you all work this out, call me. Stay out of family disputes. And we all know that these are few and far between in the funeral profession anymore, aren't they? They have all these families that get along with each other and love each other. Yeah, right. Funeral homes equal litigation targets. I put this up there yesterday. Hear it again. Average wrongful cremation award, $350,000 to $400,000. Do you want to roll the dice when it comes to getting by this time? This time, with sloppy, inaccurate, and partially filled in, because they're going to say, well, after this suit that was involved, did you have any additional training for the employees? No. Did you discipline the employee that was in question, that made a big mistake on the paperwork? No. Suspension, termination, anything like that at all? It's tough to get employees and so on. So you didn't do anything for the person that turned in inaccurate and sloppy paperwork that got you into a court of law, and you did nothing to discipline them, to suspend them. You didn't give them any additional training. How do you think that's going to go over? Not well. Consequences of sloppy paperwork, it's going to have a negative impact on your consumers, your clients. It's going to create a lasting impression of carelessness. It's going to reduce your credibility. It's going to diminish your reputation, questions your integrity. Well, if they did that, I wonder what else they do. Misleading or factual inaccurate information can have an enormous financial impact if litigated. Like I said yesterday, the attorney's favorite question is going to be, do you just not know, or do you just not care? You can't answer that. You sit there and go, families are unfamiliar with the cremation process. Cremation families know one thing. I'll explain that tomorrow in my communications program. We're going to get off the legal and get into marketing tomorrow. Two things to show our actions were professional and appropriate. Two things. There's only two things that your actions were professional and appropriate. Your word and documentation. That's all you have to show that your actions were professional and appropriate. And here's two things that I spoke about yesterday. Negligent, you messed up. To err is human. People can and do make mistakes. Reckless, you knew better and went ahead and did it anyhow. I'm supposed to have that body ID'd, but the family said they were going out of town and weren't coming back. Okay, well, I'll just practice their initials and act like they went ahead and initialed that they saw the body. Family said for me to just go ahead. And the difference in the settlement, oh my, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, whether you were negligent or whether you were reckless. And remember my words, on my initial thoughts, all defendants acted with negligence, recklessness, and in an utterly unethical and unprofessional manner. Not good. The importance of the discovery process. Okay, they're going to come into your funeral home, crematory, and they're going to rip it apart. And they can get warrants if they have to. Production of documents, that's what they're going to look for every, not just the cremation in question. They can go back 5, 7, 10 years. Look at all kinds of paperwork. Find out what they want to find out. And then after discovery, that's when they start talking turkey. Okay, do we got a good case or do we got a weak case? You know, we better start looking at settling this thing. Or you go to court, come up with a summary judgment. It's going to show your funeral home has a habit. A habit. They're going to find it. They're going to look for it. Of sloppy paperwork. Maybe no paperwork. How come during the month of June in 2019, there's 7 cremations that I can't even find paperwork on? That's a habit of poor management. Lawsuits can drag on, very expensive. You know, you Gerald Curtis, yes, you've been served. All right, now you've been sued. Obtain the right attorney, someone that knows this profession. You got 30 days to reply. You got arguments over the pleadings, you got discovery, interrogatories, depositions, and the cash register just keeps on ringing. Then you have pre-trial conferences, court scheduling, then you have the case, and then you have the appeal process. And all the while, the attorneys are sitting back. They really don't care, the attorney. They just throw everything on the wall and see what sticks. Lawsuits could be a year or 2 before you even find out you're being sued. You get served and say, what's this about? Upon being served, you have 30 days. Then comes discovery. Then comes interrogatories. Then depositions. If all runs smooth, which is never, then a trial date is set 3 to 4 months. It's not uncommon at all for a trial to take place 1.5 years, 2 years after the screw up was discovered. $4,600 pen. I showed this yesterday. For those of you that weren't on it, doesn't have to be catastrophic. Here was a gentleman that used a third-party crematory, got the urn back, gave it to the family. They took it out, scattered. There was a ballpoint pen that dropped out. The family knew the funeral director well and said, we're not going to seek legal counsel because you've been a good friend. Our kids grew up together. We went to school together. You've helped us. But our dad is very upset and he thinks he should be refunded his money. And he said, I can do that. So he wrote them. He had nothing to do with it. It was his third-party crematory that had a pen somehow got into the cremated remains, into the temporary container. Crematory said, we're not giving you a dime, let alone half of it. He said, I had nothing to do with it. There you go. There's the container, the ID disc, the bag with the cremated remains, and there's $4,600 laying there on that table. And he had nothing to do with it. Question, personal effects. Folks, personal effects are the worst thing that can get you into the biggest trouble in the world. Do any of you, when making the removal, remove and itemize, and then have a representative at the place of death sign off on what you've given them? Where's my wife's necklace? She didn't have one. Yes, she did. I gave it to her for our 50th wedding anniversary. She never took it off. Sir, she didn't have one on. What, are you calling me a liar? Where is my wife's necklace? Because here's the actual ring your funeral home lost. And this is how the family remembers the ring that was lost. A little bit of a difference. Now, are you going to argue with the family? Nope. You're going to write them a check, aren't you? document everything, take the jewelry off, give it to someone at the place of death. Here's your forms. First call, removal, authorization, next of kin, the body was identified, pacemaker, do they have one or not? Brachytherapy, radiation, seeds, implants, the release of cremated remains. You need to have all these forms, and boy, they need to be filled in. Medical examiner, and our state here, we have to have a medical examiner come in and view the body. South Carolina, you have to get a burial transit permit and then file it after the cremation. Your crematory forms, urn release forms. You need to have forms that document every step you make. You can have the best forms in the world, folks, but if they are not filled in properly, they are worthless. I mean, we had ironclad, so we thought, and we did forms that, if we went into court, we felt very comfortable. We never went to court. But if they weren't filled in properly, what good are they? How to avoid sloppy paperwork? When you talk to the family, let them know that the arrangements may take 2 to 3 hours. Cremation arrangements certainly take longer than burial. Know your forms like you know your way around your own home. Prior to seeing a family, highlight the areas that are going to be signed, initialed. Give yourself plenty of time. Don't rush. Never cut corners. If you make a mistake, start over. Do not cross out, white out anything, because if you do, the contract is now void. And if you're not sure that you have everything done properly, have someone in the office double check. And if a problem arises, make sure all documentation is isolated and preserved. In other words, get it out. If there's a lawsuit, it's amazing how it'll just walk out on its own. Failure to maintain documentation can result in you automatically losing a lawsuit. The judge can make the decision and say, Mr. Nicodemus, where's your documentation in this lawsuit? I want to see what you've done to back it up. Well, I don't have it, Your Honor. I got it all right up here in my head. You don't have any documentation. You've been involved in a lawsuit and you have nothing in writing to document anything. No, Your Honor, because it's all up here, and that's where it's going to stay, because you have nothing to back up your case. I'm finding on behalf of the plaintiffs for $475,000. We're adjourned. And that's it. Case over. Put it in a safe, safety deposit box, or give it to your attorneys. Now it wasn't so much what Nixon did, it was the cover-up. Florida. Sloppy signatures. They can't have an election down there without having a problem. Assurance. General commercial liability. Talk to your insurance agent. I honestly tell you that as sincerely as I can. And if you think this is going to stay just in Fayetteville, Arkansas, or Little Rock, or it's going all over the place. Social media is going viral real quick. Emailing and texting, remember this. I don't know why, but for some reason, people will put something in an email or text that they would never say to someone's face or put it in a letter. Emailing and texting are just as admissible as any other form of documentation. Oh, well, I'll text them. I'll let them know, and so on. No. Problem, document everything. Who you spoke with, get the first and last name. What day, time you spoke with them. Let them do the talking. Write everything down, never make an admission. Yeah, we kind of screwed up. Yeah, no. You don't ever. Yeah, I was the one that ran the stop sign, so I'm responsible for the accident. Be quiet. Attorneys love to get funeral directors on the witness stand because they don't shut up. And while on the subject of documentation, as we wrap this up, never, ever alter or create or forge documents. That's going to be a separate lawsuit called spoliation. say, well, this wasn't on here originally. I can see it was signed differently or whatever. Don't ever do it. Don't change, alter, forge, whatever. Here's some of the employees that expect to keep good records: Department of Labor, Equal Employment Opportunity, Department of Justice, jurors, judges. They expect for you to have good documentation. And like I said yesterday, how many of you have a contract with your cell phone company? Probably everyone. How many of you have a contract with your third-party cremation provider? It's an indemnification agreement, folks. I strongly suggest you get one for those that weren't on the program yesterday. That's why you need an indemnification agreement. Spells out the nature, who, what, where, when, why, who does what. And like I said yesterday, you get sued, don't take this on by yourself. Abraham Lincoln said it best: he who represents himself has a fool for a client. Hire a good attorney. But I said it even better. A good lawyer knows the law. A great lawyer knows the judge. And like the late, great Maya Angelou said, if people knew better, they would do better. That's what you're doing here today. You want to pick up just one or two things that maybe may help you do better. Say, we're going to change the way we do business around here now. And you have to, folks. It can no longer be business as usual. So again, I thank you for the privilege of your time today. There's my email and phone number. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me or give me a call. And I believe we have a couple minutes left for questions. And if not, I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the program that's communicating with cremation families. What to say, what not to say, how to handle yourself in the arrangement office, all of that. So again, thank you to ARORA for sponsoring this and having me present. And I'll turn it back over to the host.
Well, your host is glad to be back, Mike. That was excellent, and I think you were speaking the truth there. If it's not written down, it didn't happen, and you can't prove it. Are there any questions, Mike? Mike, Scott?
We don't have any questions right now. If you have any questions, please put them in the questions section. Okay, here we have a question. Let me see. They're asking if they can get copies of the presentation from yesterday and today.
I'm sorry, they're my programs, but NFDA owns the rights to them since I'm an NFDA employee. So they keep them, I keep them because it's a whole legal thing and so on with sharing programs and so on. I'll be glad to send you any specific slides that you might be looking for or whatever, but I can't share the programs due to legal issues and NFDA owning the property of the programs.
Okay. We have another question. What is your opinion of liquid cremations?
Alkaline hydrolysis. Everybody thought that was the up and coming thing. And boy, it was going to just take off. It's gone nowhere. And I think composting out in the state of Washington is becoming even more popular than alkaline hydrolysis. It doesn't matter whether it's cremation or composting or AH, whatever it is, it's all the same leading up to it, okay? Doesn't matter what the method of disposition is, it's everything leading up to that act, whether it's fire, whether it's water, or whether it's natural decomposition. So, it really hasn't gone anywhere, and I'm not sure that the price has been reduced that much to make it that attractive.
Okay. We have one more question. Can the information be viewed on the NFDA website?
The information I've gone over today, no. I don't put these programs, they don't put them up there. There are a lot of forms on the NFDA website that you can look at that I've talked about here today. On the legal page, go into forms, and we have more forms NFDA for legal issues than all other associations combined. If we don't have something that you need, give me a call and I'll make sure that we draw one up for you.
Okay, we have a couple more minutes. If anyone else has any more questions, please submit them in the questions area.
I will mention before we end, one of the big things going on out there that I'm not a real fan of is online arrangements. I like in-person people sitting across from me. Now, there are some people that really have good checkpoints as to how to make sure they're dealing with the next of kin and all this and that and what have you, and that the family's supplying the information. And if you are in a state that provides immunity from families that come in and lie and so on, good, that's a big plus. But I'm not a real big fan of online arrangements. I guess maybe call me old school, but I want to see who I'm dealing with sitting right across the desk from me, not sitting in front of their computer. Unless if there's a funeral home in Little Rock and some people in Seattle, okay, it's the wife and husband. The husband has COVID. The wife has lost their job. They don't have any money. There's no way they can get to Little Rock for whatever it is, for her to sign the authorization for her brother, whatever the case might be. Then resort to online, which is acceptable in all 50 states. So, but again, I'm just not a big fan of that.
Okay, we have another question. What is the course of action to take if cremated remains are not picked up by the designated person?
Okay, check your state statutes and see how much time you have to hold on to them. It might be 30, 60, 90 days. Maine is 4 years, but you've got them. Unfortunately, you're kind of stuck with them. But check your state statute, and they say after 90 days, you can dispose of the cremated remains in a non-discoverable manner, meaning you can take them out and scatter them or do whatever. Before you do that, you want to send, at least 2 certified letters letting the family know, pursuant to Arkansas law, 18-41, whatever it is, that we have the right to scatter these. You need to come in by such and such a date so that you have documentation. So if they come back, a week later, say, look, we've sent you, these were returned, we stopped by your house, we called, we've sent emails letting you know nothing was discussed with us. And by law, here in Arkansas, after 90 days, we have the right to dispose of them. And that's what we did. Now, if you don't want to do that, if you're holding cremated remains at your funeral home, make sure they're under lock and key, not just sitting around on a cabinet top somewhere. Make sure they're under lock and key so they just don't disappear. Because once they're gone, like I've always said, good luck getting them back. You're not, okay? I tell some people, if you got a bunch of them, go speak to some of your competitors and say, hey, if you have some, you have some, you have some, I have some, let's chip in and buy a mausoleum crypt and then catalog them and put them all in there and put the front on the mausoleum crypt so that they're all in there. I don't like the burial vault because now you're going to have water and it's going to be a mess. Okay, where a mausoleum crypt, let's say they're selling them for $2,000 and you got, 5 people, 5 funeral homes, each chip in $400 instead of you paying $2,000. unless you want to go it on your own. So,
Okay, I believe we have time for one more question, and it is asking, what about cremating any unclaimed body? A court order good enough?
yeah, court order is usually, that's what we had here, just to explain here in Virginia Beach, where I'm at. If it was unclaimed, the sheriff's department tried to do a background and find somebody. If they could not, the sheriff's department went to the judge signed off, and they came to us and we would cremate it. So if it is unclaimed and you get a court order, then you're in good shape.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions. If you have any questions, we will send them to Mr. Nicodemus.
Yeah, I'll be glad to answer them. Again, someone gives me a call and there's my email. I'll be glad to answer anything I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll get it for you. So thank you, folks, for the privilege of your time again today. Hope you took something away from the program, and I'll see everyone tomorrow.
Mike, again, that was excellent information, and thank you so much for your time. We're looking forward to having you back tomorrow and seeing what's on the program for tomorrow. Mike Scott, can we take a short break?
We can, but before we take our break, we have a handout for this afternoon's speaker. And if you go to your download area and download this document so that you would have it for this afternoon's speaker. And we will now take a short 5-minute break. Please welcome Beth Cameron, Manager of Aftercare Services, Family Aftercare.
Thanks, Mike. Welcome back from the break, everyone. We do have a couple of poll questions for you. So Mike will put those up and then you'll have a few minutes to answer each of those.
Just a second.
All right, so how many lives can be saved by one organ donor?
You have about 5 seconds left.
Okay, so the correct answer, a lot of y'all got it right, is 8. There are 8 organs that can be recovered for transplantation. Those include heart, 2 lungs, liver, 2 kidneys, pancreas, and intestine. Only 1 in 100 people who die in the hospital are able to become organ donors. As of today, there are 17 people dying on the waiting list for an organ each day. Just one donor can make a huge impact for those in need of life-saving organs. While 8 is the maximum number of lives that can be saved from one donor, many donors may donate fewer organs. So multiple organs might go to one recipient, or some organs may not be able to be recovered due to medical history or trauma. All right, Mike, I think we're ready for the second question. What services does ARORA provide to donor families following the donation?
We have about 5 more seconds.
Okay. Wow. Almost everyone got that one right. I know sometimes it's easy when there's an all of above answer on there, but yeah, so we do provide all of those services to our donor families. And so I really hope that you guys will be able to join us again tomorrow, where I'll take a few minutes in the second half of the symposium to discuss each of our aftercare programs in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Beth.
All right. Thank y'all. I'm going to turn it back over to Gerald.
Well, I'm glad to be back. When you get my age, you're glad to be back anywhere. Back by popular demand from last year, we have with us today Dr. Mario Wallace. Dr. Wallace earned his bachelor's degrees in international language and rhetoric and writing, and his master's degree in education from the University of Little Rock. He earned his doctoral degree from Walden University in business administration leadership. Dr. Wallace is the founder of the All Things Strategic Consulting firm, has more than 20 years of small business consulting experience and 11 years of healthcare consulting experience. He has considerable expertise in the areas of process improvement, change management, leadership development, medical education, program instructional development, and strategic management. We are honored today to have with us Dr. Mario Wallace, and thank you, Dr. Wallace, for giving us your time to come and enlighten us on today's subject.
Before you start, Dr. Wallace, your mic is muted. Unmute yourself.
Okay, well, thank you again. Thank you for inviting me a second year to attend this and present at this amazing symposium. With all honors and excitement, I'm happy to be here to share with you all today a subject that is really needed in the funeral industry, and that's related to leadership and what leaders should do and how leaders should grow and advance their organizations as funeral directors. So today, and welcome all who's attending, all the participants, all the funeral directors, and everybody who's in participation. So let's talk about how do we lead as funeral directors in the 21st century. Let me make sure that my presentation is showing.
Do you have 2 screens, Dr. Wallace?
Have one screen.
Okay, it's not full. It's not full screen.
Okay, can you see it now?
We can see it's not showing full screen. Go down to the bottom, hit to make it full slideshow. There you go.
What about now?
Now we can.
Okay. So I'm excited to be here today. Let's talk about how to lead as funeral directors in the 21st century. Thanks for the great introduction. I want to just talk about a couple of pieces about my background before we move forward. For 13 years, I worked at an academic medical institution as a business strategist and leadership development consultant, where I developed strategic plans for the organizations to ensure that Arkansans had access to healthcare in rural populated areas, urban areas, as well as the affluent areas. And in that, I learned a lot as it relates to the funeral industry and how we can ensure that not only do the people who live have access to the best health so they can lengthen their life expectancy, but also what it looks like on the other end as we start to deal with people who are dying and how to treat them and their families to ensure that we have the best outcome for our Kansans. Today, the topics of discussion is, let me move this out the way for a second. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second, I'm getting there. Let's discuss shifting markets and demographics, cremation versus casket funerals, discuss the millennial generation and their impact on the funeral industry, how to articulate emotional intelligence, explain the speed of trust, and discuss the art of communication. Basically, these learning objectives, what I'm saying to you is that at the end of this training, you should be able to do all of these particular things in a conversation. Yes.
Your screen is no longer showing.
Oh. Is it showing now?
No, sir.
Hold on 1 second. Let's try this again. You can see me now? Can you see me? Michael.
I'm sorry. Yes, sir. We can see you, but we can't see your screen.
Let me try this again. Man.
If you click on, now we got you.
Okay, you see my screen?
Yes,
Can you see the presentation?
Yes, sir. You clicked off of it, but now we can see your screen. We can see your screen, but we can't see it full screen now.
Oh my goodness. Okay, let me. I'm trying over here. I don't know what happened. Hold on 1 second. I really want to get through this presentation. What about now? Can you see my full screen?
No, sir.
Okay. Michael, you may have to drive.
Okay, hold on. Just give me just a second and I will.
What about now? Can you see my screen now? Okay. Are you driving, Michael?
Yes, sir. Now I've got you situated.
Okay. Go click two screens. All right, one more. So thank you, Michael. And I'm sorry, everybody. So what is leadership? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves. In this presentation, we're going to talk about what is leadership, how do we leverage casket versus cremation, how do we look at data to understand what the market is telling us, how do we sense what the market is telling us to make better business decisions, how do we leverage emotional intelligence as a leader, how do we understand the art of communication, and how do we understand what trust looks like in an organization. So Dr. Warren Bennett says that leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. Now, let me go a little further. Leadership is the ability to have foresight. That means that we should be able to see the trends in the market and understand the trends and the data from the trend to be able to make better business decisions. Leadership is also how do we empower our employees to increase their level of productivity in our companies, to help grow and to help advance our company. Leadership is also how do we make decisions to sustain, to compete, as well as to grow in our market. Mike, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's the thing. Today we're looking at shifting demographics. And what does that look like? Well, today we have cremation and we have casket funerals. But the thing about cremation and casket funerals is we need to understand what space we should be at as leaders in order to take advantage of the market. And if we don't take advantage of the market, there are repercussions that I will discuss later in the slides. Also, we need to understand, based on the shifting demographics, that the millennial generation is the largest generation today, as opposed to the baby boomer generation of 20 years ago. And thus, since the millennial generation is the generation of today, we need to understand, how do we interact with them? How do we hire them? How do we leverage their knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to meet the needs of the future? That's very critical. Next slide, Michael. So, and quickly again for a second. So when I talk about foresight, we're looking at casket versus cremation. And there are several questions that we need to ask ourselves when it comes to casket versus cremation. One is that the cremation rates today nationally is 76%. This is nationwide, versus casket funerals, which are 24%. And we're going to go to the next slide so we can really dig into what does that mean and how do we use data to make better business decisions as leaders. Okay, so this document here, this is a true breakdown. This is a recent breakdown of what it looks like across industry as it relates to burials and cremation. If you look at the left, most of the northern and eastern states, the burial rate is very low. Cremation rate, it has tripled the burial rate, meaning that this data is telling us that most people prefer to be cremated versus casket funerals. If you look towards the middle of, to the right side of the screen, we see more southern states and western states. Now, when we dig a little deeper into the southern states, we see that particularly Arkansas, 64% of people in Arkansas prefer casket versus 34% prefer cremation. But the question is, what does the future look like? If the data is telling us, if information is trending towards cremation, what are we doing as leaders in the funeral industry to ensure that we will be able to compete in this space in the next 5 to 10 years? We have to make optimal business decisions based on the data we see. I understand that a lot of people, including myself, make decisions based on our intuition, but data is something that we definitely need to consider when we make these business decisions going forward. And basically, my question to you is, when you look at this data, what do you see? It's not only what do I see, but as leaders who I'm speaking with, what do you see and what is this data telling you? How do we right size our industry and our business to ensure that we can take advantage of the cremation opportunities in the future? Next slide, Michael. So the question is, how do we use data to make changes in the funeral industry? Question one. Question two is, how do we innovate the funeral industry? And question three is, what happens if we do not innovate the funeral industry? And before I go to the next slide, I want to share with you what's on the screen is telling you that there are a lot of opportunities for cremation that we can leverage that's different from the traditional concept of cremation. As you can see in the screen, we have pods, egg pods, and we have diamonds. We can actually use that. We can actually cremate loved ones into some concepts of crystals and diamonds that people can wear as jewelry. There's a lot of different things, there's a lot of different options out there, but what I'm doing is just posing this information to you so you can think about it. Next slide. You can go to the next slide, Michael. Okay, so when I say the last question is, what do we do if we don't innovate? So think about it. When we think of blockbusters in Netflix, We think of someone, an industry leader, Blockbusters was an industry leader when Netflix came along. What happened is the leaders of Blockbuster didn't pay attention to the data, didn't pay attention to the fringes, didn't pay attention to the trends that was happening with the new generation. The baby boomer generation loved to go inside of a store, purchase and rent a movie, get popcorn, take the movie home, put it in a DVD, and share that information with their loved ones. So the family was able to gather around the TV and enjoy the movie. Well, it's different today with the millennial generation and some of the Generation X. We like to access our entertainment through the internet, through our smartphones, our computers, and so forth, and our tablets. This is what happens when we don't look at data to make business decisions. Okay, Michael, next slide. Then we talk about Best Buy in Circuit City. Circuit City was the biggest retail department opportunity in America. But what happened was the leaders of Circuit City was very transactional. They were in what we call an economic mode. Their processes and teaching and training wasn't designed to ensure that they include the customer understanding and customer expectation in their products and their services. Well, Best Buy came with a different model to ensure that although they sold similar products, their human capital, their people, approached the customers differently, right? They wanted to understand the expectation of the customer before they move forward on any product in any sale. So that means they conducted survey after survey. They allowed the customers to fill out different things and inquiries in the store, and they made those changes according to the customer's perspective. Unlike Circuit City, they did the opposite. They were not too controlled with the customer. They was controlled. There was more focus on the sale of the product. So they was disrupted. Next slide, Michael. Now we talk about Uber and taxi. So taxi has been around for years and it's still around today. But all of us know how Uber has come in and stepped in and taken the place of what we consider the taxi industry. The owners of Uber found a platform, a different way to address the need of the population through technology, apps on phone and cell phones and mobile devices, which the world was driving towards. This is similar to the Netflix model. It drove to a technology and the old taxi didn't. It stayed the same and it still looks the same today. So Uber was a better option today. And Uber is the succeeding transportation industry today in America and other countries. The thing is, what do we do as funeral leaders and directors as it relates to the data I shared with you earlier? How do we use that data to leverage our businesses and to drive more services to our funeral homes? Okay, next slide. So, have you all ever heard of the term turn the ship? So let me talk about turn the ship as it relates to what should we do in the funeral industry. So a ship this size takes a long time to turn around, right? A long time to turn around compared to a speedboat. So what does that mean? As industries begin to be disrupted by different trends and fringes in the market, and if you take your time on turning that ship, when you begin to turn that ship, you have to try to right size your staffing, your budget, your resources, and so forth. But as it takes a long time to turn that ship, and by the time the ship is fully turned and you're ready to pull the throttle to move forward, the industry has been disrupted. This is what happened to Blockbusters. This is what happened to Circuit City. And this is what happened to the taxi industry. Today we have an opportunity. Based on what the data is telling us and the trends and the data is telling us, there is opportunity to move, to begin to turn the ship today, to figure out how do we pull in different things that we're seeing and make sure that we can leverage that to be successful going forward in our future. Next slide, Michael. So the next thing about leadership is millennial versus other generations. We have to understand the millennial generation. And how do we understand the millennial generation? It's about learning from them, talking to them, to understand what their needs and desires are. As you see here, by 2030, the millennial generation will outnumber the boomer generation, which was the largest generation, by 22%. Next slide, Michael. So what does that look like? There's a concept called generational differences. We have Generation Z, which is the younger generation. We have the millennial generation is the generation that's in the workforce. Let me go back. Generation Z is more people, younger people who are still in high school and elementary. Millennial generation are people, the 20s and between 20s and 36, who are in the workforce. We have Generation X, which I am a Generation X, between 37 to 50 something, and then you have the boomer generation. Now, we have to understand the differences within those generations to understand how they think, how they move, and what their learning curves are so that we can meet them to leverage them in the funeral industry. So boomers versus millennials. So this is what it is. Today, most of our policies are written for boomers. We haven't taken the time to adjust the policies within our organization to ensure that they leverage the opportunities for the millennials, right? Most of our policies, most of our processes, and the way our industry look, our funeral homes, everything addresses the images that the boomer generations desire. But what about the millennial generation? Heavy technological, things like that. What have we done? How have we integrated things that makes it more appealing for the millennial generation? So let's talk about differences. So remember, the boomer generation was about the race to the moon, right? That means we had collective thinkers. Everybody collectively thought together as a whole. We were competing against other countries. So when Kennedy said, let's create a rocket that takes us to the moon and bring us back to Earth, we were collectively unified in that thinking, right? So everything we did, we was about production and productivity, manufacturing, and so forth. Those were the things that drove us, right? We were industrial leaders, right? Oil, coal, steel, iron for cars, diamonds. We were all about collectively winning, being the first class country in across the planet, right? But now we think of the millennial generation, we think we have to think differently. Next slide. So with the millennial generation, mass shooting began to happen. They became independent thinkers. They became social activists. The same government that we collectively as boomers stood up for, the millennial generation began to stand against, right? They began to draw a line, a demarcation in the sand and say, hey, wait a minute, there's things that I disagree with and that we need to address as a country that we tend to have a blind eye towards. So their experiences made them different, made them way different. The internet has have totally connected the world, right? It made the earth more flatter than it was during our time, right? And because it's much flatter, we see everybody as friends and family across all nations, right? It's not just about America anymore. It's about how do we look across and look at our friends across countries, right? And understand how do we work collectively together to move the planet forward. So here are a few things before we go to the next topic that we need to consider. The boomer generation are highly competitive and highly motivated towards career progression. Use of technology was significantly low in the baby boomer generation. The baby boomers are independent, self-assured. The boomers are very resourceful, right? The industrial age happened on the watch of the boomers, so they became very resourceful. The millennial generation, on the other hand, are less anchored to a job. They are more entrepreneurial, right? but we still can address that in the funeral industry. How do we bring them in to be a little more entrepreneurial? Go back 1 second, Michael. One slide. Okay. Millennials are very tech savvy. They're also highly educated, the most educated generation we've had. And they're more progressive on social issues, right? They're more progressive on being my brother's keeper in a term, in a useful term for this one. Okay, Michael. So I talked about data and trends and fringes that we need to consider in the market, and how do we need to innovate. And what we don't need to do is to take our time to start turning the ship around. We need to start turning the ship today. I also talked about the boomers, the generational differences, and particularly the boomers versus millennial, and how we need to address policies, procedures, strategies, structures in the funeral industry to adapt, to make sure that we make room for the millennials. But now I want to talk about emotional intelligence. So what does emotional intelligence look like, and how do leaders leverage that in the funeral industry? So being aware that emotions can drive behaviors and impact people positively and negatively, and learn how to manage those emotions, is a concept of emotional intelligence. There are 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence, right? The first quadrant is self-awareness. Then you have self-management, and that's related to the self. And when you think of others, we have social awareness and relationship management. So what does that mean? We must be self-aware of our emotions, of our feelings, of our triggers, in order to manage them, right? We must be able to self-manage our achievements, to be able to adapt, to have emotional control and a positive outlook. So not only should we have self-awareness, but we should have self-management. Based on what things need to change, we need to be able to look at the industry, organize a group of team together, and start determining what the future looks like, and build strategies toward the future. So we should be able to manage this concept. But we should also think of social awareness. What is happening across the world? How does it impact our industry? We should be able to have empathy and organizational awareness as it relates to other people. And lastly, relationship management, the 4th quadrant. We should be able to manage conflicts, with other people, with our team. We should be able to coach and mentor without people thinking that we don't know how to control our own emotions. So how could you manage and coach me? We should be influential, inspirational, and we should be team-oriented leaders. So click it again, Michael. So let's talk about the case for emotional intelligence. So when it comes to the funeral industries, society perceives funeral directors as people who benefit off another person's tragedy. Click it again, Michael. Society says 50% of funeral directors exist the funeral industry within the first 5 years. So what does this tell us? It said that people who come in as funeral directors within the first 5 years, they leave because of the overwhelming emotional burden that they experience. So what we have to do is figure out, how do we mitigate this percent to ensure that funeral directors can stay in the industry longer than 5 years. Stress as a funeral director is extremely high as a result of job demand. Funeral directors have multiple hats, although they lead and direct the industry. Their actual funeral home. They jump in all the time, so they wear multiple hats. So, and this becomes very demanding. And lastly, funeral directors experience disproportionate higher amounts of burnout from interactions with families. This is not a bad thing. It's just, especially during the time of COVID, there is a lot of families that funeral directors have to interact with, and be able to educate them based on certain things that happen and how they're treating the body based on this particular pandemic today. So I'm gonna go through these pretty fast, Michael. So what I'm trying to show you right here is that funeral directors, based on different eras, different times, and different situations, have to continue to adapt. And not only do they have to adapt, when the AIDS epidemic happened, they had to adapt to understand how to deal with decedents, right? COVID happened, the CDC brought out new guidelines on how to deal with decedents. What I'm sharing with you is that funeral industry is always impacted, not just the healthcare industry. The funeral industry is always impacted by things that's happening within society. And based on those things, the funeral directors have to continue to educate themselves in order to understand how to deal with decedents during whatever type of crises or pandemic or epidemic that's happening across the world. Next slide, Michael. So Hurricane Katrina, again, a lot of deaths happen. We have to figure out what to do. It's more like a spontaneous event that happened, and the funeral directors have to accelerate their learning curve in order to adapt and adjust to the conditions and the times that's taking place. So you have a huge responsibility as funeral directors. COVID, think about this. In COVID, again, we're talking about a lot of deaths that's happened across the United States, right? And policies change, right? The CDC, Dr. Fauci, and others was trying to figure out how do we adjust to make sure that we can deal, and the funeral industry is prepared to actually work with decedents during this particular time without any transference of the virus to them. So we're talking about millions of cases that took place in 600 and 700,000 deaths that took place across the 50 states in America. Next slide. Click, go to the next one. So as it relates to emotional intelligence, click it 3 times, Michael. So when it comes to emotional intelligence, you know, the thing is, the handout I gave you, and I want you just, you know, right now I know we have a short period of time to complete it, but I want you to think about, you know, what did you learn about the concept of emotional intelligence? How do we adapt and adjust as funeral directors? What are the benefits from having that discussion? And what concepts can you use to grow your skills as leaders as it relates to emotional intelligence? Next slide. So trust is another big thing. Okay, next slide, Michael. According to Stephen Covey, trust, here's another thing as a funeral leader. So we talked about understanding the fringes of society, how to adapt and create strategy. We talked to millennials, we talked about emotional intelligence, now we're talking about trust. So according to Stephen Covey, trust is both a noun and a verb, and can have several meanings. In our definition, is confidence born out of character and the competence of a person or an organization. The opposite of trust is having suspicion. Next slide. So Stephen Covey said, extending trust is the ultimate act of leadership and defining skill that transform a manager into a leader. Next slide. 5 minutes, let me get through. Keep going from this one. Okay, so we're going to go through these real fast. So I want to ask you, when you think about these particular leaders as it relates to trust, what comes to mind? So this is one slide. Go to the next slide. Just look at these. Look in your activity package, and there's something that you can answer in there. It's called leadership at a trust at a glance. What do you think about these people? Because we make assumptions about people just by the way they look, the way they talk, the way they approach us, their philosophy. We make conscious decisions about should we trust them based on things that we may not use as a judgment crutch to determine should we trust them or not. Maybe we need to dig a little deeper to understand what trust look like. Keep going. So what drivers did you use to gauge them? That's the question that I would like for you to put into your package and have some questions for me at the end of this presentation. Next one. Next. So here's an activity I really want you to work on yourself. It's basically think about someone you trust and someone you don't trust, and you answer the questions inside the package. You will be able to see that, and you will be able to determine that the ones who you do not trust, it takes way more time and effort to interact and deal with them. Next slide. Next. Click it about 3 times and go to the next one. So trust comes with practice. I want you to think about this. Trust comes with practice. It just can't happen. You have to practice trust. Next slide. So what is the business case for trust? Next one. So here's the thing. There's economics to trust. Trust equals if trust is low, speed is low, and cost is high. Next one. If trust is high, speed is high, and cost is low. Right? Meaning that people in your organization will actually execute things if you trust them and they trust you. The opposite, if you show that you don't really trust them, they're not gonna give you their all, and things that you need to execute is going to take longer to do. Next slide. So how do we develop trust? Here's a quick formula. Declare your intent on anything you do as a leader. Signal your behavior. You see people doing things outside of your intent. As you share it with them, you have to address them. Last thing, do what you say you're going to do. Don't say one thing and do a different thing. Show the same face and the same behavior all the time based on your declaration of your intent. So last thing, and I know I move pretty fast, the art of positive communication. Next slide, Michael. So the art of positive communication, this is some type of game that I put together, but it's based on a theory. So the art of positive communication identified with multiple things, right? There's 7 elements around there. And whenever you interact with someone as it relates to communication, you need to address them in all 5 elements. You greet them, you ask a question to discover, you compliment them, right? Then you disclose something about yourself. They will disclose something about themselves. You encourage, you listen, and then the last thing you do is you inspire. This is an activity that I actually do when I go out to organizations. But as you see here, these are the 7 behaviors of a positive communication. This is a great activity that you can do along with your team to teach each other what does that look like, because it don't just transfer inside the funeral home, but it will transfer also when they interact with family members. Keep going. One more. Okay, click it 3 times. So this is, and one more. Okay. So this is the end of the presentation. Again, what I touched on is critical for leaders in the 21st century in the funeral industry is understanding data, understanding trends in the market, understanding not just trends in the market, but the millennial generation, how do we leverage them, having emotional intelligence, understand positive communication, and lastly, understanding what trust look like and how lack of trust, how we can slow down productivity, affect your bottom line, and how high trust can do the opposite, grow your organization, build camaraderie and long-lasting relationships with not just the people that work with you, but also the families. Okay, Michael, that's the end of it.
Dr. Wallace, that was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed that. It gave me a lot to think about, communication and how to better market yourself for the 21st century.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
We have no.
Gerald, at this time, there's no questions.
Okay. Again, it was a great opportunity to present again this year. I know that there was a lot of information that has to be unpacked. Hopefully I facilitated and articulated myself in a way that everybody was able to pull something away from it. I know that you have your handout. Go through it. I will make the presentation available to you all if you all need to actually go through it and look at it and read it yourselves. If you have any questions going forward, I will definitely send back responses to any question that you may have.
Dr. Wallace, there's one statement here. You just said you was going to make your presentation available. Does that mean you make that presentation available via email, or will we get it here at ARORA and we can actually send it out ourselves?
Yes, thank you for that question. You can, I'll make it available for you all, where you can actually send it out to the participants.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And I
I
believe
believe we still have time for questions. If anybody has a question, please enter your questions into the question box. All right. What do you do when with a blended staff, millennials and baby boomers, Dr. Wallace?
Repeat the question again for me.
It was, what do you do with a blended staff, millennials and baby boomers?
So great question. So if you have a blended staff of millennials and baby boomers, the first thing I would tell you to do is educate them on generational differences. And let me tell you why. So I worked at an academic medical institution with nurses, and I managed, and I didn't manage, I facilitated a preceptor program where I was able to interact with nurses who were both baby boomers and millennials. The baby boomers, there's a thing called electronic medical records. What that means is that today, patients' data go into electronic medical records versus filing. In the past, the nurses would file all the medical records inside this particular file, a physical paper file. Well, the boomer generations did not want to use the electronic medical record. They felt it was more challenging. They didn't have a lot of experience with it. The millennial generation loved coming in. They learned it so fast, and they felt that the baby boomer generation was old and outdated and just basically need to leave the industry. These are the words that they said. The boomer generation said that the millennial generation were lazy. All they want to do is stare on their phone, manage technology, and so forth. My advice, based on this situation, based on my experience, is that sit down with them, have a generational differences training, share with them their differences and their similarities. And based on their similarities, leverage their similarities, and that would help you to advance your mission and goals in your organization.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. That sounds great. I have one other here, but basically it's to us. And I believe, yes, we will be sending out any documentation that Dr. Wallace has included with his presentation and the PowerPoint. I know we will be trying to make everything available online as soon as we possibly can once the actual symposium is completed. I don't see any more questions. Do we have time, Michael, or are we up?
I believe that's all the time we have. I believe that's that. We thank you, Dr. Wallace, for answering the questions.
Thank you, Michael, for stepping in when I was having technical difficulties. All right, and thank you, everybody. Thank you. If you learned something, please, I hope that you grabbed it. If you have any questions going forward, I'm available. Send those questions through ARORA, and I will get back to you as soon as possible based on your questioning. Thank you all again, and thank you for inviting me for a second year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Thank you.
Please welcome Audrey Coleman, Director of Communications. Audrey, I believe you're muted. There you go.
Okay. 1 second, please. Okay. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, our participants, for joining us again this morning and learning even more about how our common experiences working with grieving families can be even further enhanced. As Gerald shared with us this morning, we want to ensure good communication between ARORA and our funeral homes as we both serve the same families. Our first speaker this morning, Mike Nicodemus, spoke to us about funeral home liability and how not to be sued. And some of Mike's takeaway messages today were: sit down with your insurance agent and find out how much protection you have. Make sure that you keep good documentation of your work, and funeral homes have a responsibility to ensure that cremation is performed legally, professionally, and ethically. Our next speaker, Dr. Mario Wallace, shared with us some important information on how to lead as a funeral director in the 21st century. Some of his takeaways were that changes in services should be made with customer service in mind. And also, it's important to understand your customer, particularly differences in generational thinking. ARORA is very pleased to host the annual Funeral Director Symposium. We know that your time is limited and valuable, and we look forward to sharing more of our symposium with you tomorrow. Mike?
Thank you, Audrey. We want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we want to remind you to please make sure you fill out your surveys to receive your CEUs, and please to remember to use the Day 3 link if you're going to join us tomorrow. Again, please fill out your surveys. They will be emailed to you this afternoon and to receive your CEUs, and please use Day 3 link to join us tomorrow.